Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about the Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery. The Catholic Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery is the largest burial ground in Canada, containing the remains of over 1 million people. Located atop Mount Royal, it features 343 acres of garden landscape with more than 65,000 monuments and 71 family crypts. But what really fascinates us about this vast graveyard is, of course, its reputation for being haunted. Not only is this vast graveyard reputed to be haunted, but in recent years it has also witnessed all sorts of desecration and other deranged activity. Groundhogs have dug up numerous bones, coffin boards, and even sets of dentures. Trees and branches have collapsed onto tombs during ice storms. Once Canada's most picturesque burial ground, today Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery suffers from low-maintenance standards, shattered trees, and scattered bones. Global News once described this massive graveyard as a Montreal cemetery nightmare. Now, for me personally, it's one of my favorite places, but I will admit that when I'm there, it's often devoid of other people, which is probably one of the reasons why I like it. Looking to the history of the spot, though, the Montreal Catholic Diocese established Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery in 1854 because they needed more space for the dead. At this point, several waves of cholera had hammered the Saint Antoine Catholic Cemetery. It was full of corpses, many of them in mass graves, and was bursting at the seams. To alleviate this overcrowding, the diocese opened the Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery atop the mountain. Created on a property purchased from Dr. Pierre Beaubien, it was designed by landscape architect Henri-Maurice Perrot and established as a garden cemetery in the French style. Perrot had studied rural graveyards in Boston and New York, and this Montreal cemetery was intended to mimic these in style. The first burial in Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery occurred on May 29, 1855. A woman named Jane Gilroy McCready, who died at 35, was interred within the bucolic landscape. She had been the wife of a municipal councillor. Over the years, many celebrated figures were buried within the Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery. These include politicians, soldiers, and business people of all stripes. Celebrated locals such as hockey legend Maurice the Rocket Richard, politician Bernard Devlin, journalist Nick Aufdermar, and tormented poet Emile Nelligan were also buried there. Generally speaking, however, most of the dead are simply everyday Montrealers who have been interred in familial plots or vaults. Others, less fortunate, were laid to rest in paupers' graves, among them many orphans. Anatomy victims, however, were buried separately, their remains left in unmarked plots in a desolate field. Another unfortunate note, according to the diocese, the funerary sites are conceded for a fixed period not exceeding 100 years. The abandonment of the cemetery entails cancellation of the concession without indemnity by either party. This essentially means that after 100 years, burial plots are recycled if payments are not made by descendants of those interred there. And of course, the bit that you're all waiting for, there are also many reports that the Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery is haunted. While Canada's largest cemetery is the home to at least a dozen ghosts, including Joseph Guibord, Thomas Darcy McGee, René Angelil, and Mayor Camille Hanoud, we're going to focus on one in particular today. They say the spirit of Sarah Ellen Page King, known as Sadie, still lingers by her gravestone. Witnesses have reported the eerie sounds of a woman and an infant weeping, their cries filled with sorrow. Shunned in both life and death by her own family, Sadie's story is a tragic example of the injustices faced by women in the early 20th century. Sadie was married to Richard Willis King, aka Dick, who happened to be an alcoholic. They had 3 children together, Mary, Donald, and George. Unfortunately, George died after only 6 months of life. He was buried away from the main family plot under a small tombstone. For some reason after this, Sadie was promptly sent to the Saint-Jean-de-Dieu lunatic asylum. The likely reason was depression following the death of her son George. However, instead of being treated for her understandable melancholy, Sadie was locked up in the asylum for 24 years until her death in 1946. To make matters worse, her husband Dick never visited her, nor did any other family members for that matter. Furthermore, her very existence became a matter of shame and taboo for the family. Sadie was never talked about. It was as if she did not exist. Upon Sadie's death in the asylum, she was buried beside her deceased son, far away from the family plot. Nobody even erected a tombstone to commemorate her. In fact, her other son, Donald, didn't even attend the funeral. Sadie's family also refused to pay the associated fees for her burial in Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery. Indeed, the only record of her existence was through the burial records maintained by the diocese. Haunted by the treatment of her excluded and abused grandmother, poet and playwright Donna Langevin wrote a story for Sadie to expose the family taboo. Her goal was to bring Sadie's memory back to life in her literary work, and she succeeded. That being said, perhaps Sadie herself has yet to hear that her memory has now been brought to light, as she still lingers in the cemetery near the tombstone of her lost child. Haunted Montreal's Paranormal Investigation Unit is planning a visit to this grave very soon. For much of 2023, Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery was abandoned to time and the elements. A bitter labor strike left the gates locked, the graves unattended, and hundreds of bodies in cold storage awaiting burial. With no maintenance, nature began reclaiming the cemetery. An ice storm brought down trees and branches, some crashing into tombstones and vaults. Groundhogs, already a long-standing problem, burrowed undisturbed, sometimes unearthing coffin fragments and human remains. When mourners were briefly allowed in, they found an overgrown, crumbling necropolis. The strike finally ended in July of 2023, but it took months to repair the damage. By the time the cemetery reopened officially in September, workers were still clearing debris, stabilizing monuments, and catching up on delayed burials. Some families had waited nearly a year to lay their loved ones to rest. Even now, the scars remain. Some grave sites have yet to be restored, and the groundhogs still roam freely. Though they are pretty cute, so I'm not starting any petitions to get them out of there anytime soon. Many wonder whether the dead, including Sadie, who was disrespected not only in death but in life as well, will ever truly rest in peace. That's it for today's episode, but before we wrap up, we would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest content. Share your thoughts on this episode, and feel free to include any of your own ghost stories in the comments down below. While you wait for the next episode, be sure to check out the original blogs by Donovan King over at hauntedmontreal.com, where you can also get tickets for in-person haunted storytelling experiences. And don't forget, we'll be back with a new video in 2 weeks. Until then, stay spooky.